A 100,000-ton warship doesn't just back out of a parking spot. When the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most expensive warship ever built, emerges from dry dock, it's less a launch and more a controlled ballet of physics, engineering, and sheer audacity. One wrong calculation and $13 billion of taxpayer money becomes the world's most embarrassing reef. So how do you move a floating city without turning it into a very expensive submarine? Keep watching. Dry docks are basically the automotive repair shops of the naval world. Except instead of jacking up your Honda, you're draining an Olympic-sized swimming pool to work on something that makes skyscrapers look modest. The USS Gerald R. Ford spent months sitting in one of these concrete canyons at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia, getting what the Navy politely calls maintenance. Translation? They were fixing everything that broke, upgrading systems that were already outdated, and replacing parts that cost more than most people's houses. But here's the thing about dry docks. Getting a supercarrier in is the easy part. You flood the dock, float the ship in, drain the water, and gravity does the heavy lifting. Getting it out? That's where things get spicy. Because you're not just refloating a boat. You're refloating a nuclear-powered city with a population of 4,500 sailors, carrying enough ordnance to level a small country, and equipped with catapults that can throw a fighter jet into the sky at 150 miles per hour. The Ford-class carriers are the Navy's newest toys, and calling them expensive is like calling the ocean damp. The lead ship, USS Gerald R. Ford, clocked in at $13 billion. That's billion with a B. For context, that's enough money to buy every NFL team and still have change left over. Or you could buy 43 Nimitz-class carriers from the 1970s. Inflation is wild. But you're not just paying for a boat. You're paying for the most advanced naval warfare platform ever conceived. The Ford has electromagnetic catapults instead of steam-powered ones, which sounds like something out of Star Trek but actually works. It has dual-band radar that can track thousands of targets simultaneously. Its nuclear reactors generate 3 times the electrical power of the Nimitz class, enough to power a small city. Literally. The Ford could keep the lights on for about 12,000 homes. And now, after months of sitting in dry dock getting pampered like a billion-dollar spa client, it's time to put this beast back in the water. The process starts days before the actual flooding. Engineers run through checklists that would make airline pilots weep. Every valve, every seal, every system gets tested and retested. Because once you start flooding the dock, there's no undo button. The dry dock itself is a marvel of engineering. Newport News Shipbuilding has one of the largest dry docks in the Western Hemisphere. It's 2,400 feet long and 250 feet wide. That's 8 football fields of concrete and steel, designed specifically to handle the Navy's largest vessels. They have to be. When you drain millions of gallons of water, the pressure differential is immense. Before flooding begins, the ship sits on massive wooden blocks called keel blocks. These aren't your Home Depot 2x4s. Each block is custom cut from dense hardwood, positioned with millimeter precision to distribute the carrier's weight evenly. Get it wrong, and you could stress the hull, creating weak points that might not show up until the ship is halfway across the Pacific, and suddenly developing an unhealthy relationship with seawater. The flooding process is controlled chaos, allowing water from the James River to flow into the dock. Slowly is the key word here. Rush it and you create currents strong enough to shift the ship on its blocks. That's bad. Very bad. The kind of bad that ends careers and creates congressional investigations. Water enters at a rate of about 100,000 gallons per minute. Sounds fast, right? It takes nearly 12 hours to completely flood a dry dock large enough to hold a Ford-class carrier. During this time, dozens of engineers monitor the water level with laser precision. They're watching for any sign the ship is shifting, listing, or doing anything other than rising straight up as the water lifts it off the keel blocks. Here's where it gets interesting. The ship doesn't float all at once. Different sections become buoyant at different times depending on the hull shape and weight distribution. The stern might start floating while the bow is still resting on blocks. This creates torsional stress on the hull. Basically, the ship wants to twist. Engineers account for this by carefully calculating the order in which blocks can be removed and adjusting ballast tanks to keep everything level. The Ford has ballast tanks that can hold thousands of tons of water, allowing the crew to adjust the ship's trim and stability. During the refloating process, these tanks are carefully managed to ensure the carrier rises evenly. Too much weight forward, and the bow dips, minus the iceberg. Once the water level reaches a critical point, usually when there's about 15 feet of clearance under the keel, tugboats move into position. These aren't your harbor tour boats. Dry dock tugs are purpose-built powerhouses, capable of generating tens of thousands of pounds of thrust. They have to be. A Ford-class carrier displaces about 100,000 tons when fully loaded. That's the weight of 625 Statues of Liberty. If the Statue of Liberty could annihilate an enemy air force. The tugs attach to the carrier using massive cables and positioning themselves around the hull like sheepdogs herding a very expensive, very dangerous sheep. Their job is to keep the carrier centered in the dock as it rises and prevent any lateral movement that could slam it into the dock walls. One wrong move and you're looking at hundreds of millions in damage to both the ship and the dock. Communication during this process is critical. The dock master coordinates between the flooding control room, the tugs, and the ship's crew using radio systems with multiple redundancies. Everyone has eyes on everything. Water levels, ship position, weather conditions, tug positions. It's all monitored in real time. There's usually a backup plan for the backup plan's backup plan. Weather plays a huge role too. You don't refloat a supercarrier in a thunderstorm. Wind can push the massive flat surface of the flight deck like a sail, creating lateral forces that the tugs have to counteract. Even moderate wind can complicate things when you're dealing with something that has more surface area than several city blocks. As the carrier becomes fully buoyant, there's a moment where everyone holds their breath. The ship is floating, but it's still confined in a concrete box barely wider than the hull. Any swell, any unexpected current, any gust of wind could cause contact with the dock walls. This is why the process only happens during calm conditions with favorable tides. The James River's tidal range isn't dramatic, but it matters. Refloating operations are typically scheduled during slack tide, the brief period between tidal flows when the water is relatively still. This minimizes current that could push the carrier around. Timing is everything. Miss your window and you wait another 6 hours for the next one. Once the water level equals the river outside, the massive caisson gate at the dock's entrance is removed. This gate is basically a floating wall that seals the dry dock. It weighs hundreds of tons and requires its own system of tugs to move. The gate is carefully pulled aside, creating an opening to the river. Now comes the tricky part. The carrier has to exit the dock stern first because there's not enough room to turn around inside. Backing out a 100-foot-long ship through an opening only slightly wider than the vessel is like parallel parking a cruise ship. Except the parking spot is moving, because rivers have currents. And your car costs $13 billion and carries nuclear weapons. The tugs earn their money here. They push and pull in carefully coordinated maneuvers, inching the carrier backward. The dock has guides along the walls, essentially underwater rails that help keep the ship aligned. But most of the work falls on the tug captains. These guys are the fighter pilots of the tugboat world. They've spent years learning how massive ships behave in tight quarters. Speed is glacial. The carrier moves at maybe a few feet per minute. Rush it, and momentum becomes your enemy. A 100,000-ton object in motion really wants to stay in motion, and stopping it requires either a lot of opposing force or a really sturdy obstacle. The dock walls qualify as sturdy obstacles, but nobody wants to test that theory. As the carrier backs into the river, more tugs join from outside the dock. A supercarrier undocking might use 8 or more tugs working in concert. Some push, some pull, some just stand by ready to intervene if something goes wrong. It's a choreographed dance that looks effortless, but requires years of training and perfect communication. Spectators often gather to watch these events. There's something primal about seeing a warship this massive being born, or in this case, reborn into the water. The Ford is taller than a 20-story building from keel to mast. Its flight deck is 4.5 acres of real estate. When it's moving through the water, even slowly, it creates a wake that rocks every boat in the vicinity. The whole process from first flooding to clearing the dock can take 24 hours or more. That's a full day of precision work where anything can go wrong. And sometimes things do go wrong. In 2016, A carrier undocking in San Diego experienced unexpected current that pushed it toward the dock wall. The tugs corrected, but it added 2 hours to the operation while everyone's blood pressure spiked. Once the Ford is free of the dock and in open water, it's not done yet. The ship moves to a pier for post-undocking inspections and preparations for sea trials. Engineers check for any issues that might have developed during the refloating. They test systems, run diagnostics, and make sure nothing got damaged during the move. Sea trials are where things get real. This is when the Navy takes its $13 billion investment out into the ocean and pushes it to its limits. They test the catapults by launching aircraft. They run the reactors at full power. They fire weapon systems. They simulate combat conditions to ensure everything works as designed. For the Ford, sea trials have been eventful. The ship's electromagnetic catapult system, called EMALS, had teething problems early on. The system uses linear induction motors to accelerate aircraft instead of steam pistons. It's more efficient, requires less maintenance, and can launch a wider variety of aircraft. But getting it right took years of testing and refinement. The advanced arresting gear, the system that catches landing aircraft, also needed work. Landing a 30-ton fighter jet on a moving ship at 150 miles per hour puts incredible stress on every component. The Navy had to redesign parts of the system multiple times before it met specifications. But here's the thing about the Ford-class carriers. Despite the challenges, despite the cost overruns, despite the critics questioning whether we need these massive warships in the age of missiles and drones, they represent something fundamental about American naval power. They're not just ships. They're mobile air bases that can project power anywhere in the world. A single Ford-class carrier with its air wing can deliver more firepower than most countries' entire air forces. It can sustain operations for months without resupply because those nuclear reactors don't need refueling for 25 years. It can generate so much electrical power that future upgrades might include directed energy weapons. Yes, lasers, that current carriers can't support because they lack the juice. The dry dock period is essential to maintaining this capability. Ships don't take care of themselves. Salt water is incredibly corrosive. Operating in harsh conditions 24/7 takes a toll. Regular maintenance in dry dock allows the Navy to inspect every inch of the hull, replace worn components, upgrade systems, and ensure the ship remains combat ready. For the Ford, this particular dry dock visit involved upgrades to combat systems, improvements to the island structure, and modifications based on lessons learned from the first few years of operation. The Navy is constantly refining these ships, making them better with each yard period. The economic impact of these operations is massive. Newport News Shipbuilding employs about 25,000 people. Many of them are specialized tradespeople who've spent careers learning how to build and maintain nuclear carriers. These jobs can't be outsourced. You can't build a Ford-class carrier anywhere else in the world. The institutional knowledge, the specialized equipment, the security requirements, it all stays in Virginia. When you factor in all the suppliers, subcontractors, and support services, a carrier maintenance period pumps hundreds of millions of dollars into the regional economy. It's one reason why the Navy's shipbuilding budget is so politically protected. These ships create jobs in key congressional districts. But beyond economics and engineering, there's something almost primal about watching a warship this large move. Humans have been building ships for thousands of years, but nothing in history compares to a modern supercarrier. The ancient Romans would have called it a floating fortress and probably worshipped it. Medieval sailors would have assumed it was a myth, too large to be real. Yet here we are in the 21st century, casually moving 100,000-ton nuclear-powered cities in and out of dry docks like it's routine. Because it is routine, the Navy does this regularly with carriers in its fleet. Each one cycles through maintenance periods, ensuring America maintains its ability to project power globally. The moment the Ford clears the dry dock and the tugs release their lines, the ship transitions from a maintenance asset back to a weapon of war. It will undergo final checks, load supplies and aircraft, take on its full crew, and head back to sea. And somewhere, halfway around the world, potential adversaries will note that another American supercarrier just became operational again. Because that's the real purpose of all this effort. The precision choreography, the billions spent, it all serves one goal: making sure that when the president needs to send a message, When allies need reassurance, when enemies need a reminder, the United States can position 90,000 tons of diplomacy anywhere in the world's oceans within days. The dry dock is empty now, already being prepared for the next vessel. The Ford is moving under its own power, heading back to its role as the flagship of American naval aviation. And somewhere, engineers are already planning the next dry dock period. Because in the Navy, the work never stops. The mission continues. The carriers sail.